Have you ever wondered what Charles Darwin would have thought of Super Mario 3D World compared to Super Mario not 3D World? Something we'll never know, as he was banging on about plants and giant turtles. What a missed opportunity, am I right? He was only 131 years old too late. That's why you gotta eat your nanners to live longer, folks. Never know what you'll miss. Just earlier today, ate a nanner, saw a pack of 12 wild turkeys chasing a mail truck, thanked my nanners for it. With a series as popular as Mario, with so many different games released and so many of them receiving such high praise, opinions are going to be all over the place as to which ones are the best. But taking a closer look, there's been some pretty clear changes over time. In giving my opinion on whether it's been an evolution or devolution, I'd like to think I'll be somewhat fair, as I've enjoyed all of them over the years, with no vendetta against any particular games. And by the way, we're just talking about the main platforming Mario games, no Mario Kart, tennis, or any of that. No Donkey Kong either, sadly. The first main difference I've noticed is what I feel is the most obvious one: the difficulty. Admittedly, Mario games have never been crazy difficult compared to other games of their time, but try playing the original Super Mario Bros. After playing Odyssey and watch how quickly your butt gets handed to you. And while there might be certain difficult spots in later games or ways to make them more challenging, my argument remains that there has been a clear shift by Nintendo in the challenge of the games. When this shift occurred and why it occurred is pretty obvious to me too. Like, when did you start wearing a hat? When I went bald! Didn't happen to me yet, but quick moment of silence for anyone watching who has lost their hair. The Wii is when things changed for Mario's difficulty, I think, with the Wii being a console that sold substantially more units than the Nintendo home consoles that came before it, not to mention the waggle controls bringing a handful of more casual fans, nothing against them, my fellow waggle peeps, rise up, but Nintendo now had to accommodate a much larger demographic of people, including newcomers, so back-breaking difficulty, or even just face slap and difficulty, wasn't necessarily going to be the best choice. Instead, the Super Mario Galaxy games have what I'd like to call tickle your cheeks difficulty. The cheeks on your face, you dirty dogs. Just enough to give you something to think about and manage, a slight obstacle, but delightful nonetheless. And the lack of difficulty is noticeable. I've had moments where I go back to Mario 64 and Sunshine after playing newer 3D Mario titles, and always notice the difference in difficulty right away. I suppose some people could disagree with that, but to me it's really apparent and leaves me in a weird place. On one hand, I can understand that Nintendo is trying to get future generations of gamers into video games, remember to play your video games, kids, and trying to appease someone in their 30s isn't their only goal. But on the other hand, I think, give me what I want. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoy the easier Mario games. Heck, I enjoy them a lot, but I think I'd like them even more with extra challenge, which is ironic because as a kid, I probably would have been perfectly happy with games being easier. Goodness knows I liked things easier as a kid. This was the easiest way to do homework as a kid, and hey, what do you know? It's the easiest way to wash the dishes as an adult too, at least until it's not. But with video games and difficulty, when folks around my age were kids, we didn't have much of a choice. Heck, we were raised on the laughter and ridicule of the dog from Duck Hunt. Playing video games and getting your butt whooped went hand in hand, but can a change in difficulty over the years really be considered an evolution or devolution? I would say yes, the easier difficulty can be considered a devolution, and here's why. Difficult games don't exist just to be cruel to the player, except for maybe Ninja Gaiden. I needed some water while playing that game once, and look out, that game is full of dirty tricks. Difficulty in games has a purpose, and a very important one, which is to push the game's mechanics to their limits, with the main one in Mario games being the precise running and jumping. You know, platforming, the genre of video game these are. Avoiding falling in enemies, landing timing jumps precisely. That's what Mario games are all about. But with the 3D games, and especially the newer ones, you have a lot more safe space to work with, giving a ton of margin for error. Whereas with the older 2D games, there was much less margin for error, and you had to be very precise. Maybe not for every second, but for quite a bit of it, making the running and jumping mechanics even more important, and therefore pushing your required mastery of those mechanics, which feels really good when you do it. That's why people like these games. One metaphor I often like to use is that the newer 3D Mario games are more akin to playgrounds, where older 2D Mario games are more like obstacle courses. Just think how much an obstacle course would lose its value if you could just run on the ground, or the obstacles were made to be way larger, easier to stay on, and less precarious. The precise way you need to move through 2D Mario games is a huge part of what gives them their identity and character. And look, more freedom of movement can be nice. Trust me, of all people, I get it. And you can say hello to Captain Dingleberry Sampson, who likes to wiggle and boogie loose through the home. Some might say that compromised depth perception in 3D platforming evens the difficulty scales, but I'd say for the wrong reasons. 2D platforming often requires more precision, but is more fair because you can see clearly. Failing due to lack of good depth perception is often just frustrating. Old Captain Dingleberry can verify that one too. But now let's talk about coins, one of the most iconic things in Mario games. But what happens when coins mean less? Yeah, you don't care as much. In those original Mario games, you are scrapping and saving because the lives you can earn from collecting them is super valuable. When collecting lives isn't as important because the game is either easier or has less harsh penalties for dying, collecting coins becomes less meaningful, more like bells and whistles, hearing that iconic jingle sound, as opposed to something imperative. And yeah, they kind of help this out in the 3D games by the coins serving the purpose of replenishing your life bar, but that just feels more like a way to make sure it's really hard to die more than anything. Kind of reminds me how I keep them nanners around the house so I don't go hungry. Now, with all that said, the 3D games are really dang fun, like crazy fun. So fun that I tend to not care about anything except for how much fun I'm having. And the secret sauce for all of it is a ton of creativity. It started with the Galaxy games, in my opinion. Nintendo thought, well, if we're gonna make the games easier, then we just need to make it such a magical experience that people don't even care. And by and large, people didn't care, with the Galaxy games being praised far and wide. From that point on, I'd argue most games followed the same formula, with precise platforming taking a bit of a back seat and creativity taking the driver's seat. Not that older 2D Mario games weren't also creative. In fact, I'd say they were probably about as creative as they needed to be. Super Mario Bros. 3 and World still feel like perfect video games all these years later. But the more recent 3D games just seem to be constantly trying to outdo each other, a challenge within Nintendo that only serves to benefit all of us. Heck, at times it has almost felt like nobody even bothers competing with Mario in the 3D platformer space. And when somebody does, it's like, wow, they actually tried. Astrobot fans know what I'm talking about. What really makes the 3D Mario games tick for me is the number of moments while you're playing them where you think, this is the coolest thing ever. Video games exist so that we can do things we can't do in real life. Things we could only imagine, like riding a horse that doesn't stop to poop. But the idea is to have the imaginations of clever game designers flung upon us with each new stage, catching us off guard in the best way possible and igniting our own sense of wonder. Speaking of which, let's talk about Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which stands out for being a side-scrolling platformer, but instead of being based around precise running and jumping, it's much more forgiving in that regard compared to older 2D Mario games, and instead adopts the philosophy of more modern Mario games, which Makes sense, seeing as it is a modern Mario game, by throwing tons of playful creative things at you. Heading into each stage, you have no idea what's going to be in there, but you know it's going to be fun. And it's going to be fun to pretty much anyone who has even a glimmer of sunshine in their soul. That's the new Mario game design mindset, and when it comes to having evolved, I'd say it is indeed an evolution, pure joy and delight. Do I personally prefer the older 2D games? By just a hair, yeah. As a personal preference for playstyle, I do. I also prefer 15-foot turtles, but can understand why only smaller turtles are around these days. What I'd really prefer is to have the difficulty of the older games combined with the creativity of the newer games. But overall, I still think it's fair to say the series has evolved, which means I think Mario games have devolved in certain ways that are personally significant to me, while acknowledging that the series has still evolved overall, especially if you think of evolving in terms of survival the way our guy Charles Darwin did. Mario has certainly endured and survived, and hey, if it gets the kids into video games, then I'm all for it. But seriously, kids, give Super Mario World a try. Also, it's sweet. But that just about does it for me. I would of course be curious to hear what your thoughts are, as always, keeping in mind that with a subject as broad as this, we are just not all going to see things the same way. So with that, leave a comment and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about me.